I can't go home. The elderly woman regained consciousness in the intensive care unit and asked the doctor to tell her children that she had died. But when she found out who had come to pick her up, she couldn't believe it. Before we begin our story, let's do a little roll call. Please write, where are you from? We would love to read it. Enjoy the listening experience. Dolores sat in the kitchen, tiredly staring at the chipped edges of the wooden table. The room smelled of freshly brewed mint tea, but even this scent couldn't calm her anxious thoughts. She didn't want to leave this place because she knew the sound of the opening door would soon come, and Mindy, her son's wife, would burst into the apartment. Once again, she'd throw a sharp remark from the doorway, rolling her eyes and furrowing her thin brows. Recently, their relationship had reached its boiling point, and Dolores felt she could no longer bear the tension. Unlike her, Mindy had never tried to smooth over their conflicts. While Dolores had still tried to avoid arguments, her daughter-in-law, on the contrary, seemed to enjoy every biting word directed at her. She'd enter the apartment with her head held high, like a queen about to show everyone who was in charge. And always, without fail, she'd tie her hair in a tight ponytail and put on a bathrobe that only highlighted her combative attitude. It seemed she deliberately prepared for another attack, choosing an elderly woman as her target. Dolores tiredly shifted her gaze to the window. Outside, the autumn city spread out, yellow leaves falling from the trees, swirling in the air, and rare passers-by wrapped themselves in warm coats. It seemed like a beautiful landscape, but it didn't bring her joy. Every day felt the same as the last, and with each passing moment, she longed more to return to her village, to that very house where most of her life had unfolded. Her son had brought her here, promising it would be just for a short time, until he finished the renovations in her house. Dolores initially hoped she'd stay with him for a month, maybe 2 at most. But time passed, and a month turned into 6 months, then a year. Her son's promises remained just that, promises, and Mindy, day by day, made it clearer that she had no intention of tolerating her in the apartment. And now, as Dolores gazed out the window, she saw a tall girl in a dark coat rounding the corner. Mindy! She walked quickly, energetically, angrily speaking into the phone. Dolores sighed and silently turned away from the window, hoping her daughter-in-law would be delayed in the store or at least argue on the phone for a little longer. Just half an hour more of peace. But no, Mindy hung up the call, lifted her head, noticed her mother-in-law at the window, and smirked, waving her narrow palm. There was no greeting in this gesture, only mockery. Dolores felt a knot tighten inside her. It was only getting worse. This wasn't just a strained relationship, it was becoming some sort of war. She needed to talk to her son. He should take her back to the village, even if the house wasn't finished, even if it had no doors or windows, anything to escape from this tense, hostile space. The door slammed, and Mindy burst into the apartment. "Well, how was your day?" she said sarcastically, throwing her bag onto the kitchen table. "Did you spend the whole day sitting by the window again? We brought you here so you could just sit and do nothing." Dolores flinched but didn't reply. She knew that any phrase she uttered would be seen as a reason for another verbal duel. "By the way, I wash, clean, take care of you, cook," Mindy continued, rolling her eyes. "Have you ever said thank you?" Dolores responded calmly. "Do you really think I do nothing? Maybe you should say thank you to me." "Oh, as if cooking soup was such a big effort." Mindy theatrically threw her hands up. "By the way, your son and I are working to fix up your country house, and you're just living on the ready-made." Dolores winced. "Order? You just want me to give you this house?" Mindy froze, her gaze turning sharp, like needles. "Well, that's that," Dolores said quietly and turned away. Mindy smirked, her lips twisting into a disdainful smile. She couldn't stand her mother-in-law. Not that she truly hated her, but it was easier for her to see her as an enemy. It was simpler when there was someone to blame for her problems. They fought almost every evening. Well, Mindy fought, and Dolores simply endured. She endured the words, the tone, the feeling of being a hostage in someone else's home. "You know, I've been thinking," Mindy suddenly said, leaning closer. "I don't just hate you for no reason." Dolores looked at her, surprised. "We're family, but you don't even want to give up the house to us. You're old, what are you holding on to it for? You've lived your life, you could move into a nursing home. Your son and I need the housing war." Dolores's heart wavered. "I'm not that old," she replied, her voice growing firmer. "I still want to live. And definitely not in a nursing home." Mindy grimaced, preparing to respond, but just then, Rick, Dolores's son, entered the apartment. He looked worn out, tired, and painfully pale. "Rick, your mom is causing trouble again," Mindy immediately threw out, not even letting him sit down. Dolores closed her eyes, knowing the performance was about to begin. "Rick, let's talk later," he muttered tiredly. "I don't have the strength to deal with this." Dolores looked at her son, and her heart squeezed. He was exhausted, his eyes dark from insomnia. It was clear that something was bothering him. Something he wasn't talking about to either her or his wife. "Of course," Mindy huffed. "While you're getting yourself together, I have to listen to this." "Stop," Rick said quietly. But Mindy was already launching into a new tirade. Dolores sighed heavily. How much longer will this go on? And why is her son staying silent? Why doesn't he notice that his wife is poisoning his own mother? She looked at Rick and suddenly realized he knew. He knew, but he did nothing. And that meant she'd have to save herself. Dolores sat in her chair by the window, absent-mindedly fiddling with the edge of her scarf. The room was filled with tense silence. Rick was tiredly rubbing his temples, while Mindy, deftly switching from a poisonous fury to a tired but caring housewife, sat down opposite her husband and crossed her arms over her chest. "I don't understand how you can tolerate this," she said with an offended look. "We work from morning to night, we try, and your mom thinks I'm offending her." Dolores sharply lifted her eyes and stared directly at her son. In his gaze, there was a shadow, not of fatigue, but of guilt. He looked drained, like someone carrying an unbearable burden. "No one is offending you," she said quietly, choosing her words carefully. "You start every day by dumping a bucket of anger on me." Mindy scoffed and dramatically turned away. "And I wonder where my anger comes from," she quipped, looking at Rick. "Maybe because I'm working my ass off for everyone here." "Let's just end this conversation." Rick suddenly stood up, sighing heavily. "I don't want to figure out who's right and who's wrong right now." Dolores wanted to argue, but she stopped herself. What difference did it make? Her son would still side with his wife, as he had done many times before. Every day, it was becoming harder for her in this house. She no longer felt like part of the family here. When did it all start? When did their cozy home, filled with warm light and the smell of fresh baking, turn into an icy arena where every conversation felt like another battle? She looked at her son. 10 years ago, he had been so different, smiling, cheerful, loving. And now, the person sitting before her was someone with dull eyes and a back hunched under the weight of his problems. "Son," she said softly, "take me back to the village. Even if the renovations aren't finished, even if it's cold there, I just can't stay here anymore." Rick froze. The tension hung in the air. As soon as Mindy heard her mother-in-law's words, she immediately became alert, sensing a threat to her plans. "It's impossible," Rick finally managed, avoiding her gaze. Dolores frowned. "Why?" "Because the house doesn't exist anymore," Rick admitted with a heavy sigh. Seconds froze. The room became so silent that the ticking of the clock on the wall seemed to echo every new minute. "What do you mean, no?" Dolores felt her mouth go dry. Rick clenched his fists. "I needed the money," he exhaled. "I sold the house." The ground seemed to slip out from under her. Everything that had kept her going all this time, all her hope of returning, vanished in an instant. She opened her mouth, but couldn't utter a word. "S sold? How?" Her house, her corner, her memories, her happiness, everything now belonged to strangers. Mindy, noticing her state, smirked with satisfaction. "Well, that's it," she said. "You don't have anywhere to return to. You'll have to live here now." Dolores felt a sharp pang in her chest. Her son hadn't even considered asking her about it. He had just taken away the one thing that connected her to the past. "I couldn't tell you," Rick said quietly. "I'm sorry," but she no longer heard him. Memories of the past flashed before her eyes, her husband, laughing on the porch of their old house, children running around the yard, the apple trees blooming in the garden, everything that had been part of her life. And now it was gone. She had no strength left to stay in that room. She slowly stood up, feeling her hands tremble. "Mom," Rick tried to stop her, but she silently walked to her room, closing the door behind her. Through the walls, she could hear voices, Mindy and Rick arguing, but she no longer cared. She was exhausted. All she wanted now was silence. Dolores sat in the dark, pressing her back against the cold wall. In the small room they had put her in, there was silence, broken only by the muffled voices from outside. Mindy was arguing with Rick about something, but Dolores no longer cared. She felt emptiness growing inside her. The house, her beloved house, no longer belonged to her. It wasn't just the loss of a roof over her head, it was the loss of everything that had made up her life. There, in the village, every corner was filled with memories. Every cracked brick hid a piece of the past. She remembered how her husband, Richard, had brought her there in their youth, proudly announcing that this would be their family nest. How they planted apple trees in the garden, how they sat on the porch in the evenings, wrapped in a single blanket. Now all of that was lost. "I've become a stranger in my own life," Dolores bitterly thought, clenching her fingers around the thin blanket. Tears welled up in her throat, but she didn't let them fall. It was pointless. Rick had already made his choice, and as much as she wanted to believe otherwise, that choice wasn't in her favor. Footsteps outside the door grew louder, and then the door cracked open. A tall figure appeared in the weak corridor light, her son. "Mom, can I come in?" She silently turned away, unwilling to look at him. "I understand you're angry," Rick sighed, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "I didn't want things to turn out this way." Dolores bitterly smiled. "You didn't want to?" Her voice came out hoarse. "You didn't even think to tell me. Just sold." Rick lowered his head. "I didn't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice, son. Sometimes, people choose what's easier, not what's right." He sat heavily on the edge of the bed, his fingers interlocked. "You don't even know what kind of situation I'm in," he began, and desperation laced his voice. Dolores watched him, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't see an adult man before her, but the same little boy she once comforted after a failed exam, who she wrapped in a blanket when he was sick. He looked small and helpless again. "Tell me," she quietly asked. Rick ran his palms over his face, as if trying to wipe away his exhaustion. "I have huge debts," he confessed, and Dolores felt her heart clench painfully. "I didn't want you to know, but there was no choice. The people I owe money to, they didn't wait. They were demanding it. If I hadn't paid," he went silent, and Dolores suddenly realized that he was truly scared. "Is it because of Mindy?" Rick shook his head. "No, yes, I don't know. She loves money. She wanted to open a business, but everything went wrong. Had to take out loans, and then more and more. Everything got out of control." Dolores closed her eyes. All this time, she thought Mindy was just irritated by her presence, but now the picture became clearer. Her daughter-in-law was not just capricious, she was dragging Rick to the bottom. "Mom," Rick looked at her pleadingly. "You understand I couldn't do otherwise?" She wearily rubbed her temples. "I understand," she replied. "But that doesn't mean I forgive." Rick lowered his head. "I'll try to fix everything," Dolores smirked. It was already late. Dolores lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. Her thoughts were racing, intertwining into a suffocating knot that wouldn't let her catch her breath or gather her strength. Rick had left, leaving behind only the bitter aftertaste of a confession and no less bitter realization. He was no longer the boy she once raised. Through the thin walls, muffled sounds could be heard. Mindy was whispering something into the phone, quickly, irritably. Dolores closed her eyes, trying not to eavesdrop, but the words still penetrated her consciousness. It should have been resolved by now. Mindy was clearly angry. "I don't know why she's still alive." Dolores froze. "No, I didn't drink anything." "I think she guessed." A chill ran down her spine. She listened even more carefully. "Yes, I'll try. But if it continues like this, we'll have to act differently." The woman pressed her hand to her mouth to stop herself from screaming. Her chest tightened in horror. Mindy had tried to poison her. It became hard for her to breathe. All this time, she had attributed her discomfort to age, stress, anything, but not to the fact that someone was deliberately trying to kill her. Her hands began to tremble, and one thought flashed through her mind: she had to run. But how? If Mindy guessed that she suspected something, tomorrow could be even worse. Dolores carefully sat up and, trying not to make noise, swung her legs off the bed. Every movement was difficult, her body felt weak, almost not hers. Barely touching the floor, she felt dizzy. "Hold on," she commanded herself. She slowly approached the door, barely touching the handle, and cracked it open. The apartment was dark, only a dim light bulb was burning in the corridor. Mindy was still talking on the phone in the kitchen, and that was her only advantage. Dolores stepped into the corridor, her bare feet silently tapping on the cold floor. She made her way to the front door and took hold of the lock. Just then, from the kitchen, she heard the sound of a chair scraping back. Her heart skipped a beat. Mindy was finishing the call. Wasting no time, Dolores turned the lock, and as soon as the click echoed in the night silence, she swung the door open. "Where are you going?" Mindy was already standing in the corridor. Dolores didn't answer. She stepped out the door, but the weakness in her legs betrayed her. The world in front of her eyes spun, and before she could grab the wall, her consciousness plunged into darkness. Dolores awoke to the sensation of cold. The floor under her body was hard, uncomfortably cooling her skin through the thin fabric of her robe. Her head was buzzing, and her throat was dry, as if she had spent days without water. She tried to sit up, but immediately felt the weakness course through her body, forcing her back down. she regained consciousness, and a voice was heard. "Mindy." Dolores slowly turned her head. Her daughter-in-law was standing in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest. There was no anxiety on her face, just irritation, as if she were facing not a living person, but an inconvenient piece of furniture. "What, are you trying to make a drama?" Mindy squinted. "I thought I wouldn't have to endure your suffering anymore." Dolores stared at her face. And for the first time, she clearly saw in Mindy not just an angry, irritated woman, but something entirely different. Something cold, calculating. Her voice was weak, breaking. "Did you really want me to die?" Mindy smirked. "What if I did?" Her voice was venomous, almost melodic. "Let's stop pretending. We needed your house. You don't. You're old, useless, you're in the way of us, the young." These words hit her chest harder than a slap in the face. "You're wrong." Dolores clenched her fists, forcing herself to stand up. "I'm not old. I'm not useless." Mindy rolled her eyes. "God, here we go again. But you, Mindy, are wrong about something else." Dolores finally stood up, leaning against the wall. Her body was trembling, but her voice sounded firm. "You think I'll give up? You think I'll just lie down and quietly die? But you forgot that I've lived a life. I've seen hardships that you couldn't even dream of. And if you think I'll just disappear, you're gravely mistaken." For a moment, a shadow of doubt flickered in Mindy's eyes. But it quickly vanished, replaced by her usual mockery. "You talk too much, and you're too sure of your victory." Dolores stepped toward the door. "Where are you going?" Mindy raised an eyebrow. "To a place where you can't get to me." Mindy laughed. "Seriously? You think Rick will protect you? He won't live a day without me. He's glad I'm dealing with you." Those words hurt deeply, but Dolores didn't show it. "I'll find a way," she simply said, and left the room. Mindy didn't follow her. She knew the old woman wouldn't go anywhere. She was wrong. Dolores stepped into the corridor, struggling to keep her balance. The walls seemed to sway, and the air had become too heavy. Every movement was difficult, but she knew if she gave up now, she might not get another chance. From the kitchen, muffled sounds could be heard. Mindy was speaking on the phone again, probably confident that her victim was already broken. "Hurry. I need to get out." Dolores slowly reached the front door, but as she touched the handle, she felt weakness once again threaten to give way beneath her feet. "Hold on." She mentally commanded herself, taking a deep breath. With a jerk, she opened the door and stepped into the hallway, and then, gathering her last bit of strength, she began to descend the stairs. Every step felt off. She didn't know where to go. The main thing was to get away from here, away from that apartment, from that woman who had been smiling while watching her suffer. When she stepped into the yard, the evening air hit her face with a cool breeze, and it revived her a little. People were passing by, some hurrying home, some smoking thoughtfully near the entrance. No one paid attention to her. She walked on, feeling her legs shaking. Where to go? Who to turn to? And then she remembered. The neighbor. Alice, whom she occasionally ran into near the elevator, had always been kind to her. Maybe she could help? Dolores turned into the second entrance, found the doorbell button, and pressed it. A few seconds passed before anything happened. Then footsteps. The door opened, and an elderly woman in a housecoat appeared in the doorway. Dolores? Her eyes widened in surprise. What happened? Dolores opened her mouth, But instead of words, only a faint whisper of help me escaped, and the world plunged into darkness. Dolores awoke to someone gently patting her cheek. Her eyes didn't focus right away, and at first, she could only see a blurry silhouette that slowly took on clear contours. "Dolores, sweetheart, can you hear me?" The voice was anxious, but warm and caring. She barely made out the features of the face. It was Alice, the neighbor, sitting in front of her, the doorstep of whose apartment she had collapsed. "Where am I?" Her voice betrayed her weakness. "You're safe here, dear." "What happened? Why are you like this, and why were you walking alone in the building?" Dolores tried to sit up, but there was no strength in her body. Her head was spinning, and everything in front of her eyes was blurry. "They poisoned me," she whispered, barely audible. Alice's eyes widened. "Oh my God." "Who?" "Mindy." The weakness hit her again with full force, and speaking became even harder. "Damn her." The neighbor immediately stood up, grabbed her phone, and started typing quickly. "I'm calling an ambulance, Dolores." "Hold on, dear, they'll be here soon." The words sounded muffled, like they were coming through cotton. Dolores tried to stay conscious, but her whole body felt like it was made of cotton, and her eyelids kept closing on their own. "Don't pass out." "Hello." Alice's voice cut through the silence. "Urgent, my neighbor is in bad shape, she's been poisoned." "Yes, poisoned, I'm telling you." Dolores could barely hear the words anymore. The only thought in her head was, "I survived. I made it." She woke up in the hospital. The white ceiling, the smell of medications, the muffled voices of doctors outside the door. She tried to move, but her body felt as if it didn't belong to her. "Oh, you're awake." A nurse, about 40, with a kind but strict face, was standing next to her. Dolores tried to speak, but her lips were dry, and her tongue seemed unresponsive. "It's better if you don't talk right now. Your body is weakened, but you're in good hands." "Where?" she barely managed to say. "In the city hospital. You were brought in at night, and it was just in time. It would have been too late if you had come any later. You have severe poisoning." Dolores closed her eyes. "So she really tried to kill me." "You're lucky your neighbor called the ambulance in time," the nurse continued. "We've already informed your relatives." Dolores's eyes shot open. "No." Her voice was still weak, but there was desperation in it. "Don't tell them," she whispered. The nurse raised her eyebrows in surprise. "What do you mean?" Dolores struggled to take her hand, gathering her last bit of strength. "Please. Tell them I died." The nurse frowned. "What nonsense. They'll kill me if they find out I'm alive." The woman thought for a moment, but it was clear from her eyes that she believed her. "All right, I'll talk to the doctor. But you have to tell me everything." Dolores nodded. "Not now." She closed her eyes again, allowing herself to slip into a much-needed sleep. A few days passed. Dolores was recovering, but still felt weak. During this time, no one from her family had come, and that only confirmed her suspicions. They were waiting for confirmation of her death. One evening, a doctor entered her room. He was a man in his 50s with an intelligent and attentive look. "Well, Dolores, I feel like you don't want to go back home." She looked at him and nodded. "What should I do?" The doctor thoughtfully tapped his pen on the folder. "We have an option. You can be officially listed as dead, but that will take time. Also, you'll need a new place of residence." Dolores involuntarily clenched the sheet. Where would I go? Do you have any relatives? She was about to say no, but then remembered something. More precisely, someone. My husband had a brother. We didn't keep in touch with his family, but I think he had a daughter. The doctor nodded. Then we'll search. He made a note in the documents and then looked at her closely. Are you sure you want to disappear from their lives? Dolores closed her eyes, and in her mind's eye, Mindy's face appeared, her mocking look, her cold tone. She remembered how Rick had sold her house without hesitation. Yes, I'm sure. When she opened her eyes, there was no doubt in them. Yes, doctor, I want to disappear from their lives. Forever. A few more days passed. Dolores was walking down the hospital corridor, leaning on a cane. She was still weak, but strength was gradually returning. She stopped by the window, looking at the city. Dolores? She turned. In front of her stood a young woman, about 30, with almond-shaped eyes and light hair. You don't remember me, but I remember you. Dolores furrowed her brow. Sorry, but my name is Gwen. My father is your late husband's brother. Dolores sharply inhaled. So, you're my... Gwen smiled. Almost. You could say I'm your distant niece. Dolores stared at her, trying to grasp the reality that this wasn't a dream. I found out about you by accident, through a mutual acquaintance. You're in a difficult situation right now, but I have an offer for you. Dolores looked into her light, kind eyes. Which one? Gwen smiled. Move in with me. That evening, for the first time in a long while, Dolores fell asleep without fear. She was no longer alone. Dolores held a cup of hot tea in her hands, feeling the warmth slowly spread through her palms. The room smelled of something sweet. It seemed Gwen was baking something in the kitchen. The house was spacious, bright, with high ceilings and huge windows, lawns that opened to a quiet street with neat houses and green lawns. It felt like she had entered another world. Just recently, she had been lying in the hospital, not knowing what to do next, and now she sat in a cozy living room, surrounded by people who welcomed her as if they had been waiting for her their entire lives. Are you comfortable here? Gwen sat next to her, watching her with a gentle smile. Dolores nodded. Yes, it's just unfamiliar. Everything is so beautiful. Gwen laughed. Well, that's thanks to my husband. He loves everything to be top-notch. Yes, he seems like a serious man. Dolores recalled their first meeting. Thomas, Gwen's husband, had greeted her calmly but respectfully. A tall, strong man with a penetrating gaze, he made an impression of someone used to keeping everything under control. But there was no arrogance in his voice, just quiet confidence. Gwen has told me a lot about you, he had said then, shaking her hand. I hope it was only good things, Dolores joked. Only good things, he smiled. Dolores was amazed at how warmly his family had accepted her. There was no suspicion or awkwardness. They treated her as if she were not a guest, but a long-lost family member who had returned home. You don't have to worry about anything now, Gwen said confidently. Just relax, or find something you enjoy doing. The most important thing is for you to feel good. Dolores looked at her with gratitude. You know, I didn't think I'd ever have a chance at a normal life again. Gwen took her hand. Now you have a family. We won't abandon you. Weeks passed, and Dolores realized that she truly liked it here, in this house. In the morning, she would go out into the garden, where Thomas had set up a small corner with flowers and a bench. She enjoyed walking there, breathing in the fresh air, feeling life returning to her body. Gwen often sat beside her, chatting about something light and everyday. "Tell me about your house," she asked one day. Dolores thought for a moment. It was simple but warm. It always smelled like pies. We had a garden, small but cozy. My husband really loved it. She fell silent, remembering how Richard used to water the garden beds in the evenings and then sit on the porch, lighting his pipe. "Do you miss it?" Gwen asked. Dolores looked at her. "Sometimes, yes. But I understand there's no way back." Gwen squeezed her palm. "You'll be able to build a new life here." Dolores smiled. "I probably will." And for the first time in a long while, she truly believed it. Rick sat in the car, absent-mindedly tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. Mindy was beside him, enthusiastically scrolling through her phone, smirking at something on the screen. Inside, there was silence, broken only by occasional sighs and the sounds of notifications. "Well?" Rick glanced at her sideways. "Everything's fine." Mindy smiled contentedly, leaning back in her seat. "We handled it cleanly." He nodded, refocusing on the road. The whole day had been tense, but now that everything was over, he felt a strange sense of relief. 2 days had passed since they received the call from the hospital. When an unknown number appeared on the screen, Rick didn't immediately pick up. Subconsciously, he already knew the call was about his mother. And he was right. "Rick? This is the doctor from the city hospital. We have your mother." "Which mother?" Mindy interrupted, lazily crossing her legs. "Dolores? She came in with severe poisoning." Rick frowned. "Poisoning?" "Yes, it's serious. We need to discuss some things." Mindy exchanged a glance with her husband and, without waiting for his response, grabbed the phone from him. "Listen, doctor," her voice turned cold, hard. "This isn't our business. She's an adult, and if something happened to her, it's her problem. But do you understand the level of toxins?" The doctor started, but Mindy abruptly interrupted him. "We're not going to discuss this. All you need to know is that we're not interested in this story." There was a silence on the line. "But you're her relatives," the doctor said. "Forget about it," Mindy said, closing her eyes and patiently waiting for the doctor to speak again. "All right," came the voice after a pause. "But there's one catch. Officially, her condition requires investigation. We'll have to hand the case over to the police." Mindy quietly laughed. "Oh, doctor, you're so amusing. What if we decide to handle this differently?" Rick sighed, rubbing his temples. He already knew how this would end. The next day, Mindy went to the hospital. She deliberately chose a modest but stylish outfit, a dark suit, light gold jewelry, and strict makeup. Everything about her appearance spoke of business, confidence, and a woman who was used to keeping things under control. The chief doctor saw her immediately. "Please, have a seat," he said, gesturing to a chair. Mindy sat, crossing her legs. "Do you understand why I'm here?" The chief doctor, an older man with graying temples, looked at her carefully. "I have an idea." "Excellent," Mindy said, and without further words, she took an envelope from her purse and carefully placed it on the table. "This story is of no use to anyone. Not to you, not to us." The doctor hesitated for a moment, then reached for the envelope, putting it into the drawer. "Do you want the case not to be handed over to the police?" Mindy smiled. "Well, and of course, for everyone to believe that she is dead." The man adjusted his glasses and nodded thoughtfully. "No problem. We'll make the paperwork look like the patient passed away during the night." Mindy suppressed a satisfied smile. I hope for your professionalism. The doctor leaned back in his chair. Money solves a lot, but people can be different. Are you sure you don't want to take her with you? Mindy laughed. I think, Doctor, you still don't get it. The doctor nodded silently. An hour later, Mindy left the hospital and dialed Rick's number. It's all settled. The old lady is gone. He exhaled into the phone. Finally. Now we can live peacefully. Rick sat at a table in an expensive restaurant, lazily swirling a glass of whiskey in his hands. It had already gotten dark outside, but inside the hall, it was cozy and quiet. Soft chandelier light, subdued classical music, and the unobtrusive conversations of other guests. Mindy sat across from him, happily scrolling through a luxury brand catalog on her phone. What do you think of this bag? She turned the screen, showing him a photo of a stylish accessory with a price tag in the thousands of dollars. If you like it, buy it. He took a sip, not particularly interested. Mindy smiled contentedly, adding the item to her cart. How nice it is to be able to afford everything you want, she said, lighting a thin cigarette. Rick grunted. Well, not everything. Come on, she coquettishly looked at him. We've denied ourselves for so many years, it's time to live normally. He silently nodded. In fact, he was amused by how easily Mindy had entered this new life. They had easily gotten rid of the burden of his mother, erased her from their reality, and now nothing was holding them back. Rick had long dreamed of this kind of freedom. After selling the house, he hadn't spent any money, he just put it in a deposit, letting it accumulate slowly. He had told Corinne that the house was sold to pay off urgent debts, but he didn't have any debts. He just wanted a financial cushion, knowing that someday this moment would come, the moment when he could finally live without looking back. And now that moment had arrived. Tomorrow we're going to the car dealership. Mindy put out her cigarette, brushing the ash into the ashtray. It's time to replace this junk. You mean my car? Our car, she smirked. We can afford better, so why drive a wreck? Rick smirked. What made you think I'd let you burn through all the money so quickly? Mindy snorted. Why save it? We're not in some fairy tale about a squirrel who hoards for the winter. Money should work. Or just be spent on all sorts of nonsense. He squinted at his wife. Mindy shrugged. What, you want to live in poverty again? We didn't live in poverty. Right, sure, she rolled her eyes. Remind me, how many times did we have to count every penny in the last few years? Rick remained silent. Let's not go back to the past, he finally said. Well, that's what I'm saying. It's time to stop limiting ourselves. Let's live normally. Rick shook his head, but deep down he knew she was right. He liked the feeling that money gave them, freedom. They owed no one anything. And he was ready to enjoy the moment. The scent of sea air mixed with the fragrance of the expensive perfume Mindy had generously sprayed on herself that morning. She walked down the street of Tel Aviv, swaying her hips, while Rick trailed behind, squinting from the bright sun. In his hands was a bag with souvenirs and a new pair of sunglasses that Mindy had bought him at some boutique, simply because his old ones looked cheap. They had been enjoying life in Israel for 2 weeks, swimming in the warm waters of the Mediterranean, trying local delicacies, and thoughtlessly throwing money around. I want to try something new, Mindy said, stopping by a small bar. New? Rick looked at her suspiciously. We just spent a ton of money on tours and restaurants. What more do you want? Mindy lazily ran her hand over his shoulder. You're not thinking about the right thing, darling. Her lips spread into a sly smile. She scanned the street, and then her eyes lit up. "There he is," she suddenly exclaimed. "Who?" Mindy pointed with her chin at a skinny man in white pants and cheap sunglasses. He was standing by a wall, lazily smoking, but his gaze was sharp, calculating. He had clearly noticed them earlier. "I've wanted to try something unusual for a while," Mindy whispered, leaning closer. Rick grimaced. "Mindy, are you serious?" "Absolutely," she winked playfully. "Come on, Rick, don't you want to experience something new?" The dealer, sensing their interested looks, immediately perked up, put out his cigarette against the wall, and slowly approached. "Tourists?" he asked lazily, smiling. "Maybe," Mindy replied. "Maybe I have something you need." Rick frowned, but Mindy was already pressing against him, whispering, "Come on, Rick, when else will we get a chance like this?" The dealer paused, studying them. "You're not locals," he concluded, tilting his head. Mindy obviously laughed. The man nodded, then with a subtle movement pulled out a small transparent bag from his pocket. "Best quality, pure pleasure," he whispered, as if advertising elite wine. Rick sighed heavily. "Is this safe?" The dealer grinned. "Absolutely." Mindy was already reaching for her wallet. "Let's take it." Rick wanted to argue, but seeing her fiery look, he realized it was pointless. A minute later, the bag was already in her hand, and they were walking away quickly, leaving the grinning dealer behind. That evening, in their luxurious room with panoramic windows that offered a view of the city lights, Mindy sat on the edge of the bed, twirling the fateful little bag between her fingers. "Rick, what if this is the best night of our lives?" Her eyes were sparkling with excitement. Rick watched her, feeling unease stirring inside him. But could he refuse her? Rick sat on the edge of the bed, holding a glass of expensive cognac. The room was quiet, except for the gentle hum of the air conditioner and the steady buzz of the city outside. Mindy stood by the mirror, squinting as she studied herself. She was excited, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Well, darling?" She smiled slyly, tossing the small transparent bag in her hand. "Ready for a new level of pleasure?" Rick took a sip, held the warm liquid in his mouth for a moment, and then slowly swallowed. "Are you sure this is okay?" He didn't like to take risks, especially in a foreign country. Mindy laughed. "Of course. Look at how much money we have, how many opportunities. We are living the life now that we could only dream of before. What are you suddenly afraid of?" Rick shrugged. "I just have a bad feeling." "Stop it," Mindy stepped closer, running her finger along his cheek. "Let's just relax." He sighed, knowing it was useless to argue. Mindy pulled a credit card out of the coffee table drawer, opened the little bag, and carefully poured the powder onto the smooth surface of the glass table. At that moment, there was a sharp, booming knock at the door. They froze. "Are you expecting someone?" Rick whispered. Mindy frowned and shook her head. The knock came again, this time more insistently. "Open up, police." Blood froze in their veins. Mindy quickly hid the bag behind the pillow, and Rick jumped to his feet. "Shit! Shit! Shit!" Mindy hissed. The knocking turned into banging. "Last warning. Open up, or we'll break the door down." Mindy rushed to the door, but Rick grabbed her arm. "What are you doing? If we don't open, they'll break in anyway." She yanked the handle, and in that instant, the door flew open, hitting her shoulder. A group of people in uniform rushed in. Behind them, slowly entering, was the same dealer they had met on the street. "Here they are," he said tiredly, pointing at Rick and Mindy. "I told you they bought." Mindy flared with rage. "You bastard, you sold us out?" The dealer shrugged. "I was the first one caught. You thought I'd cover for you." "Hands behind your head," one of the officers barked. Mindy opened her mouth to say something, but Rick squeezed her wrist, forcing her to comply. Without a word, he muttered through clenched teeth. The next second, they were thrown to the ground, pressed against it, and cold handcuffs snapped onto their wrists. Mindy screamed. "You have no right to do this. We're tourists, we didn't do anything." "The substances found suggest otherwise," the officer replied flatly. Rick gritted his teeth, realizing they were in big trouble. Big trouble. A few hours later, they were sitting in a holding cell. Mindy nervously paced back and forth, snapping at anyone who came near her. Rick sat on the hard bench, blankly staring at the floor. "We need to call someone," Mindy repeated for the 5th time. "Call who?" Rick smirked. "Do you even understand what kind of mess we're in?" She turned sharply. "No, Rick, do you understand what kind of mess we're in?" He wearily rubbed his face. "Calm down." Mindy shot him a furious look. "Go to hell." She rushed to the bars, yanked on them to catch the guard's attention. "I'm entitled to a phone call." He lazily looked at her and waved his hand. "One call." Minutes later, Mindy was frantically dialing a number. Beeps. 1, 2, 3. Damn. Come on. The subscriber hung up. She gritted her teeth and tried again. "Please, pick up." More beeps. Again, no answer. Mindy tremblingly dialed another number. Pause. "Hello?" "Oh my God, yes." Mindy spoke frantically into the receiver. "It's Mindy, we have problems, we urgently need help." "Who is this?" Mindy froze. "What do you mean, who?" "You must have the wrong number." Beep. Disconnected. She stared blankly at the screen, unable to believe what had just happened. The guard smirked. "All done? The call finished?" Mindy slowly lowered the phone. No one. No one answered. They were alone. Mindy stood by the bars, gripping the phone so hard her knuckles turned white. Inside, everything was boiling with anger, fear, and rising panic. Everyone she called either hung up or pretended not to know her. Even those who had known her as a successful and influential woman just ignored her now. But there was still one option left. Mindy gritted her teeth before dialing the number. "Are you serious?" Rick, who had been silent up until then, looked darkly at his wife. "We have no other choice," she hissed, pressing the phone to her ear. The beeps dragged on, unbearably long. "She won't pick up," Rick smirked, but just then, a quiet voice came through the receiver. "I'm listening." Mindy momentarily lost her voice. She didn't expect Dolores to actually pick up. "This is me," Mindy gasped, trying to catch her breath. "Dolores, you have to help us." There was silence on the other end. "Please." The desperation in Mindy's voice was unmistakable. "We're in Israel, we've been arrested, they might send us to prison." Dolores remained silent. "We need money, we need a lawyer, anyone who can get us out of here." Mindy spoke faster, realizing that if she didn't convince her now, there wouldn't be a second chance. Then Dolores sighed softly. "You didn't even want to bury me," she said calmly. "What?" "You wanted me to disappear. So now, live without me." Mindy froze. Dolores, no. I don't exist for you anymore. Her voice was flat, emotionless, devoid of anger or joy. But you, Mindy stuttered. And then, short beeps. Dolores hung up. Mindy slowly lowered the phone. Rick, who had been watching her all this time, just snorted. Who would have thought? Mindy stared blankly, unable to comprehend that even the person they had despised and erased from their lives was the only one who could save them, but refused to. They were alone. The trial was quick. The evidence against them was undeniable: arrest records, protocols, the testimony of the dealer who had been the first to turn them in. In Israel, they didn't go easy on tourists caught with drugs. As the verdict was read, the judge didn't even lift his eyes. Defendants Rick and Mindy are found guilty of possession and use of illegal substances in the state of Israel. Mindy clenched her hands into fists. She didn't hear the last words. The world around her was slowly crumbling. Everything they had, everything they had worked so hard for, vanished in an instant. 3 years passed. Dolores sat in a small, bright studio, her fingers gently running over the soft clay. Her hands moved smoothly, confidently. Just a couple of months ago, she never imagined she would feel useful again, creative, full of energy. The pottery wheel spun slowly, and in her hands, a new ceramic vase was taking shape. Through the open window, a warm summer breeze rushed in, carrying the sounds of laughter and voices from the street. A little girl was playing in the backyard, laughing joyfully, and a dog was running after her, barking with excitement. "Grandma Dolores, Grandma Dolores," came a high-pitched voice. Dolores looked up and saw a tiny girl with chubby cheeks and light hair, just like Gwen's, running into the studio. "My sunshine, why are you running around so fast?" She wiped her hands on her apron and bent down to pick the girl up. "Dad said we're having dinner in the garden today," the girl exclaimed, clapping her hands. Dolores laughed. "Well, then we'll have dinner outside. Are you going to make us some new plates? You're a real magician now." Dolores smiled, gently stroking her granddaughter's head. "I will, sweetheart, I will." Life in Gwen and Alexei's home was completely different, calm, warm, filled with care and simple, yet genuine happiness. At first, Dolores had a hard time accepting the fact that she wasn't just a guest anymore, not just a temporarily saved woman, but part of this family. But Gwen wouldn't let her feel out of place. "Grandma Dolores," she would say with a smile, "now you're with us. Forever." For the first time in many years, Dolores felt like she was truly needed by someone. Thomas, Gwen's husband, turned out to be a man of his word. The moment Dolores mentioned that she had always loved working with her hands and dreamed of doing something creative, he immediately helped her open a small studio. "You have golden hands," he said, handing her the keys to a cozy space on the first floor of their house. "Now you'll have a place where you can create." And so, her pottery studio was born. The first few weeks, Dolores was relearning everything. She tried, made mistakes, got frustrated at times, but with each passing day, she was getting better. Gwen and her daughter were her first clients. They enthusiastically praised every cup, every plate, even if they came out a little crooked. Then, real customers began to appear. People liked her works. There was something special about them, something warm, as if each plate or vase carried a piece of her soul. "See," Gwen gave her a hug once. "I told you, you'd make it." And Dolores finally believed it. That evening, when the table was set in the garden, the air was filled with the scent of flowers and freshly mowed grass. Dolores sat next to her granddaughter, adjusting the light shawl on her shoulders. Thomas was pouring wine, Gwen was serving snacks, and the dog circled around their feet, hoping to snatch a bite of something tasty. "Grandma, tell me a fairy tale," the little girl asked, holding onto Dolores' hand. "Which one?" "The kindest one." Dolores paused. Earlier, her life had seemed like a series of trials, but now, looking at this family, at the people who had accepted her as one of their own, she realized that every hardship, every betrayal in the past had brought her exactly here. And this was the kindest fairy tale of all. She smiled. "All right, my dear, I'll tell you a fairy tale. About how one day, when everything seemed lost, life suddenly gave a second chance." Rick lay on the hard cot, staring at the ceiling, cracked and gray, just like his own life. The cell was small, cramped, smelling of sweat, dampness, and hopelessness. The air was heavy, as if tainted with despair that had seeped into the walls. A few meters away, in the corner, sat Mindy, hugging her knees with her arms. She had been silent for hours, not lifting her eyes. It had only been 3 days since the verdict, but time here seemed to have stopped. Every day was the same, strict routine, heavy doors, and different guards. No one was in a hurry to save them, no one was waiting for them outside. They were no longer needed by anyone. "Do you think Dolores knew how this would end for us?" Rick suddenly asked, not tearing his gaze from the ceiling. Mindy looked at him with an empty, dead gaze. "Probably. She could have helped." Mindy tugged at the corner of her mouth. "But she didn't want to." Rick sighed deeply. "Because we deserved it." Those words sounded like a sentence. Mindy shrugged as if she wanted to object, but couldn't. She had nothing to say. Somewhere beyond the wall, there was noise, someone was shouting, someone was laughing. Here, in this place, everything was soaked with other people's stories, just as dirty as their own. Rick closed his eyes. Suddenly, memories of childhood flooded back to him, an old house, the smell of freshly baked bread, his mother bustling in the kitchen, her warm voice, her eyes full of love. Then, he remembered how he had betrayed her without a second thought. How he had let Mindy humiliate her every day. How he had kicked her out of the house, deprived her of the last thing she had. How he had abandoned her when she was in the hospital. He had made his choice. Mindy slowly ran her hands over her face, then spoke, her voice muffled, as if through force, "We're not getting out of here, are we?" Rick didn't answer right away. He knew the truth. No one's going to pull them out. "No," he said quietly. Mindy leaned back, closing her eyes. There was no more money, no more power, no more freedom. How do you like this story? Hit the bell so you don't miss new videos. See you soon, dear listeners.